So I have to admit, I never in my entire life expected to ever have the chance to sing that song in front of a group of people. I'm still not entirely sure I should have done it. It doesn't feel like a song for that. But I actually told my parents that we were going to sing this, and they were just like, really? Why? Because it's definitely a kid's song, and it's a pretty comical, or not comical, but yeah, kiddie way of describing it. But it does actually speak to some core Quaker values. So the chorus of the song starts with, walk in the light wherever you may be. The core belief of Quakerism is, and this was spoken to a little bit in the skit, is that the light of God is in every person, and that to connect with divinity, rather than go to church and listen to a priest or a minister, you should connect with the divinity within yourself and others. So God, rather than being a being up in the sky, is within each of us. To walk in the light is to live every day connected to that light so that you are living in the way God intends. I don't entirely identify as Christian, and I know a large part of this congregation doesn't either. But I interpret this as everyone having a piece of light or goodness or truth in them. I've often heard it described as truth, so everybody is a piece of the puzzle of truth. I try to remember this when I disagree with someone strongly. Just because their point of view disagrees with my understanding of the truth doesn't mean that they don't have some part of the truth too. And just because someone does something I consider horrible doesn't mean they don't have something good in them too. My least favorite thing that people say to me after I say this is, what about Hitler? Which is really, really a common response, but and the answer is not everybody's favorite, but I believe that Hitler had a piece of good in him too. So to this day, I view everything through that light. I met with a Protestant chaplain in graduate school who tried to convince me that I am Christian. Looking through his lens of Christianity, which is universalist and does not require belief in the Trinity, he's probably more liberal than I am, and he's a university chaplain. I see God in absolutely everything. Every blade of grass, every bar of soap. Like in the poem Eric read, it's easy to fall in love with the world when you can see the beauty and the divinity in everything. One difference in terminology you'll hear me use is the use of the term Quaker meeting rather than church. Because God is in each person, a church and minister are unnecessary for worship. All you need is a group of people, a meeting. So although many meetings have buildings, they're not called churches because the space itself is not sacred. You could have a Quaker meeting in the middle of a grassy field or in the middle of a parking lot, and it would be sacred. What makes it sacred is the people in it. As a kid, I was taught the Quaker values with the acronym SPICE: simplicity, peace, integrity, community, and equality. Simplicity is a really interesting challenge in modern Quakerism. It used to be taken really, really seriously. George Fox's old leather breeches and shaggy, shaggy locks are referenced in the song Jenny and I sang today, and thank you again, Jenny, for being willing to do that. That's a reference to his lack of focus on his appearance. He didn't get his hair cut very often, and he actually was trained as a leather worker originally, and so the leather breeches just last a really long time. And he didn't replace them even when they started looking beat up, which I should tell my dad to tell my mom every time he wants to go somewhere in his jeans with giant holes in the knees. What he did was infinitely more important than what he looked like, and he dressed with that in mind. One of the reasons Quakers are often confused with the Amish is that plain dress for Quakers reminds people of traditional Amish dress. I actually had to Google plain dress to be reminded what it means, because obviously I don't follow it. Plain dress is lack of ornamentation, so no patterned clothing. I think George Fox's phrasing in one of his journals was no unnecessary cuffs and collars and lapels and buttons. So George Fox would look pretty far down. I'm actually not wearing earrings today intentionally, but normally I wear earrings, and George Fox would look down on that. And I don't wear tons of jewelry, but I do like my earrings, and I love my colorful clothing, and I love my purple car, which would definitely be frowned upon. The Quaker meeting I was raised in is primarily upper class members, a lot of current and former university professors. I know at least one member with a second beach house. Both my brothers and I went to a pretty private college, or a pretty expensive private college. The town I grew up in, and actually, ironically, the private college that's really expensive is a Quaker college. The town I grew up in is one of the most expensive places to live in North Carolina. And we all know the prices around here. Can any Quaker living in the Bay Area or in San Francisco claim to be living simply? For the last few years, my parents' Quaker meeting has struggled with whether or not to replace the rug in the meeting room. Like, this is a big argument. Both my parents have been clerks of the meeting, which is a 3-year term, in the last 10 years. And clerk is like, I guess it's the closest you get to a minister. It's an unpaid position, and they lead the meetings, and basically their job is to try and speak to everyone and get a sense of the meeting. So try and understand what's going on without having a strong opinion. It's a pretty big role, and you have to listen to a lot of people. But because they've both been clerks, I've gotten to hear a lot about the process, despite being away at college and grad school and then out here. So there's an internal struggle between people who want the space they worship in to be aesthetically pleasing, which I know a lot of us can relate to, because like we have flowers. We have flowers every Sunday, and I had a whole internal debate about whether to not bring flowers, and then decided I didn't feel like pushing the boundaries too much. And our beautiful, beautiful paintings, which change regularly. Okay, I lost where I was. But yeah, there's the balance between people who want the worship space they are in to be aesthetically pleasing, and the people who value the simplicity of a stained old rug. I went to my grandmother goes to, I think, Methodist church in Maine that is absolutely gorgeous. And my mom and I really enjoyed going to the church with her. And my dad was kind of horrified because, like, you can only imagine how much, I mean, it's in Maine, so the taxes are less, but like, you can only imagine how much money went into making a beautiful, beautiful building with stained glass windows and like intense architecture. So it's a struggle. So like George Fox's old leather breeches, if you're going from the view of simplicity, maybe the rug serves a purpose. And if that value is cushioning the floor, even stained, it's still providing that value. The funnier reason the rug continues to not being replaced, which I probably shouldn't share, is that no one can agree on the color. Like, at all. So, and since Quakers operate by consensus, everyone has to agree. It means they just never make a decision. I believe the latest is that they have, I think somebody decided to force the issue, so they redid part of the building, and they just decided to rip up the rug. So right now they have no rug, and they're hoping that with the utter simplicity of no rug, it's gonna annoy people enough that they'll finally be able to make a decision. So in Quakerism, the value of integrity means we never lie and should never be expected to prove we don't lie. That comes into play in courtrooms when you're asked to swear on the Bible. I don't know, I actually didn't even think about this till I was writing this, but like asking somebody to swear on the Bible is assuming in some way that they're going to lie, because I think the original idea was that, yeah, the Bible will enact vengeance if you lie after swearing on it, so it's supposed to scare people into telling the truth. But if you are by faith utterly truthful, then it is an absolute insult to be asked to swear on the Bible, and it shouldn't have meaning. So Quakers are willing to affirm that they will tell the truth, and I know somebody who's written on paper when you're supposed to swear, they've created their own section for affirming. My mom was involved in a court case in the last few years and was totally prepared to refuse to swear on the Bible because of her religious beliefs, and she is pretty non-confrontational, so that is, like, I believe there was some solid preparation there. And she was kind of disappointed when they readily agreed to let her affirm. Apparently it's become a regular enough practice that at least in some courts it's accepted. So I wasn't actually planning to talk about this, but because I brought up Hitler, I feel like I need to go into that a tiny bit more, which is the peace testimony. So when you view the world from the lens that there is a piece of good in everyone, so most Quakers don't believe in the death penalty, because even if somebody has mass murdered, like Hitler did, there is still a piece of God in them, and there is still a piece of truth in there, even if it's really, really, really hard to find. And so that is the perspective that comes from. And it's also the reason for the pacifism and no war, because if there's a piece of God in everyone, you would never kill someone. There would be, it's a really, really, really hard place to come from. There's actually a book and a movie that I'm forgetting the name of about someone who spent a really long time talking to somebody on the death penalty, or on death row, because and I think it ends with them basically coming to terms with the fact that the person did actually commit the murder, and it was from a bad place, but still that just trying to view, it's hard viewing, it takes a lot of care and love and a whole lot of forgiveness to view the world from the place that remembering to see the good in people, even when there's actually a whole group of people who have chosen to forgive the person who murdered a member of their families because they don't want them to go on death row. So you can only imagine how hard that would be to come to that. So when I say that I believe there's a piece of good in Hitler, I'm not saying he didn't do absolutely atrocious things. I'm just saying that doesn't mean there's not a piece of God in him. One of the largest displays of community I've ever seen was at the high school youth's meeting for worship with attention to business at an annual Quaker conference, French General Conference, if anybody knows of them. We don't call business meetings meeting for worship with attention to business for nothing. When done correctly, the more challenging the discussion, the more silence there is. Even in the most peaceful meetings, they try to have periods of silence in between everything, which doesn't always work, but they really do try. But really, whenever things get tense, the clerk of the meeting is supposed to stop the conversation and say, let's have a moment of silence. That's part of their role, is to just make sure that we don't make any decisions out of frustration. Because when you're speaking from an emotional place, it's important to hear that emotion, but it's also important to let the emotions come to a calmer place before making a decision. And this silence is regardless of how much longer it makes the meeting. On top of that, most decisions in a Quaker meeting are made by consensus, meaning that everyone has to agree. As a teenager and a young adult, I was in several meetings that had 100 plus people on contentious issues, so everyone agreeing was a total fantasy. What happens then is that usually at least one person stands out or steps out. They do exactly what, or not exactly, but similar to the more calmer version is they stay and they just eventually choose to agree with the majority. But in more contentious cases, what often happens is one person, or multiple people will say, I don't agree with what you're doing, but I recognize that I'm holding up the process, and I recognize that the majority of the group disagrees with me, and so I am choosing to not be a part of this conversation. They basically say, I don't agree and I'm not going to agree, but I will let you finish. So I really like it because it means that the process always includes everyone. Because even though they are choosing to have the decision go to someone else or go a different way than they agree with, even if they strongly disagree, they are making that choice and they are part of the process. Whereas I feel like the voting system where the majority wins, the minority, they don't get anything out of it. Like, it's just, this way everyone's heard. It really does connect with every part of the community. And often they really try to let as many people talk as need be. So it really connects with the community. And the clerk's job is to try and listen to everybody and hear everyone. And often if it is a contentious case, they will try and at some point just try and sum up and say, hey, so this is what I'm hearing. And usually when they say that, they try and bring out the different cases that they hear and explain why what the conclusion they're coming to is the consensus. And then people have the opportunity to disagree. They go on for a long time. So the high school meeting I attended started at 8 p.m. and lasted until at least 2 a.m. in the morning because high schoolers. Several teenagers had been caught with drugs, and since the high school group is theoretically led by high schoolers, which I know UUs try and do too, having youth-led communities, we were deciding what to do. So the hours were taken with many youth telling their experiences with drugs and considering the reasons why the youth might have chosen to participate in something illegal during the conference. There were a lot of tears and an amazing amount of silence. I believe the teens ended up deciding to forgive the youth involved. However, the larger adult conference disagreed, and I think they were sent home. The teens were naturally not very happy because they put a lot of energy into the discussion and truly a lot of maturity into finding consensus and had their decision overruled, but it was a complicated situation. If there's anything I would take from Quakerism, it would be the use of silence in making decisions and resolving conflict. The level of respect shown for everyone in well-led Quaker meetings for worship with attention to business is something that I've never seen to the same degree in any other group, even if it does make meetings take longer.